The sun was just cresting over the horizon when Brandon Hopkins decided he needed a break from his self-imposed schedule. A high-powered marketing executive from a large city, he had carved out a week of vacation that was really just an excuse to keep working from a more scenic location until last night's near breakdown made him realize how hollow that approach was. Instead of cramming in an early conference call, he stepped out of the quaint bed and breakfast where he was staying, tucked his phone into his back pocket, and started walking without any particular direction in mind. A gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly baked bread and cinnamon sugar. It led him to a simple storefront in the heart of the small coastal town. A wooden sign hanging from a wrought iron bracket above the door read, "Bakery." There were no other flourishes, just the word that said everything it needed to say. Something about the simplicity and warmth of that aroma made him push open the door, even though it was barely past dawn and he had eaten a breakfast of fruit and yogurt half an hour ago. Inside, the sweet scent was amplified, and he found himself almost instantly soothed. Shelves lined with loaves of sourdough, rye, and whole wheat were arranged like proud souls. A basket of cinnamon rolls, their glaze still dripping down the sides, tempted him, as did a row of golden croissants, some of them studded with chocolate chips. The walls were painted a pale yellow, evoking sunlight even on the foggiest coastal mornings, and 6 small tables filled the modest seating area. It was a local spot, unassuming and unpretentious, but in that moment it looked like exactly what Brandon needed. He approached the front counter, where a petite older woman stood with a white apron stained by flour. Wisps of silver hair framed her round face. She was in the midst of kneading dough on a large wooden board behind the counter, her arms dusted with flour up to the elbows. At the sight of a customer, she wiped her hands on a dish towel and offered a kindly smile. "Good morning, dear," she greeted. "You're up bright and early. What can I get you?" Brandon caught himself pausing for a moment, self-conscious about how different this was from his usual routine. Normally at this hour, he would be checking spreadsheets, reading emails, or preparing for a meeting. He resumed his polished, executive demeanor. "I'll take whatever you recommend. It all smells wonderful. Well, we just pulled out some croissants. They're still warm. How about that and a cup of coffee?" Something in her voice made him think she had plenty of other suggestions, but she sensed that was exactly what he needed. He nodded gratefully, took a seat at one of the small tables, and glanced at his phone. It was blinking with messages, emails piling up, the day's social media analytics, budget approvals, calls scheduled with European clients. His attention started fracturing. He tapped the phone's screen with an uneasy sigh. Then, as if feeling guilty for nearly sliding back into old habits, he locked the screen. For the first time, he decided to let the messages wait. As the woman brought him the croissant and coffee, Brandon took in the surroundings. A blackboard behind the counter listed the day's menu. Artisanal breads of different varieties, pastries stuffed with seasonal fruits, a few local specialty pies, and something called Martha's Sweet Surprises, which intrigued him. Early morning light slanted through the lace curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like shimmering fairies. The gentle clinking of utensils in the kitchen provided a comforting soundtrack. He bit into the croissant, its flaky layers dissolving into buttery bliss. "This is incredible," he mumbled, not quite caring that he was speaking with his mouth partially full. She smiled as she lingered by his table, refilling his coffee. "Started baking them at 4:30 this morning," she replied, pride evident in her tone. "If you'd come in 20 minutes earlier, you might have caught the smell as they were finishing in the oven." He savored another bite and felt something in him thaw, but he wasn't quite sure what. Maybe it was the gentle pace of the place, so different from his everyday hustle, or maybe it was that he was finally letting himself experience life rather than manage it. Regardless, he found himself growing unexpectedly curious about the woman who ran this little bakery. He noticed the lines of age etched into her face, but her eyes sparkled with a vitality that made her age impossible to guess. He cleared his throat. "I'm Brandon, by the way," he said, offering his hand. "I'm here on a vacation." "Lovely to meet you, Brandon. I'm Martha," she said, shaking his hand with a grip that felt strong despite her slender frame. "I've owned this bakery for nearly 30 years. 30 years? He glanced around, taking in the well-used yet carefully maintained equipment. It must be a lot of work. It is, but it's a joy too, Martha replied. Made some mistakes along the way, learned a lot of lessons, but it'd take a force of nature to make me give this place up. Brandon smiled politely, but inside he warranted that the mistake-laden journey Martha referred to was probably nothing compared to the high-stake decisions he had to make in multi-million-dollar marketing campaigns. He leaned back in his chair, sipping the coffee, which he found to be surprisingly good. Looking around, he realized another odd sensation. He wasn't in a hurry to be anywhere else. He returned the next day, drawn back by something he couldn't quite name. At first, he told himself it was the croissants. He had never tasted anything so exquisite. But that was only part of it. He also liked the way the small bell tinkled when he opened the door, the way Martha greeted him with a nod and a genuine smile, and the sense of calm that washed over him in the bakery's warm, flower-scented interior. On this second morning, the pastry of the day was an apple turnover sweetened with honey from a nearby farm. As he ate, Brandon scrolled through his phone, guilt tapping at his consciousness each time an email or text notification flashed across the screen. Halfway through breakfast, he found himself telling Martha that he was supposed to have a phone meeting in half an hour. Maybe you can take it tomorrow, she suggested innocently, her focus drifting to a large ball of dough she was kneading on the wooden countertop. Time is precious, and so is peace of mind. Doesn't it feel good to let your mind rest? He considered her words. Peace of mind was alien to him. He had built an entire career on always being accessible. If a client couldn't reach him, that might cost him a deal. But as he watched Martha lean into the dough, using a rhythmic push-pull motion, he was taken by the simple artistry of creating something tangible. She was shaping flour, water, salt, and yeast into a living product that would nourish people. It was beautiful in its practicality. What's it like baking every day? He asked, truly curious. It seems meditative. She pushed the heel of her hand into the dough. It can be, if you let it. You get to work with your hands, you're fully present. You learn patience when you wait for the dough to rise, empathy, too, in a funny way. Brandon frowned, unsure of how dough demanded empathy. Martha must have caught on, because she smiled. Bread dough is alive, you know. You have to understand how it reacts to temperature, humidity, how the yeast feeds on the sugars. Each batch is unique. If you force it too hard, you can ruin it. But if you gently guide it, you can make something wonderful. Same with people, I find. Brendan felt himself blush a little. He didn't think he was heavy-handed with people, but he had certainly bulldozed through a few negotiations. He changed the subject by asking about the local area, and Martha indulged him in stories of the town's fishermen festivals and the close-knit community that popped over to the bakery for everything from soccer fundraisers to retirement cakes. Over the next few days, Brandon made Martha's bakery part of his morning ritual. Slowly, his phone calls and emails dropped off from urgent to moderate, and then to occasional checks. He found himself having conversations with the few regulars who came in, a teacher who used to be a pastry chef, a fisherman who swore that cinnamon rolls were the best remedy for seasickness, and a retiree who believed that Martha's bread had single-handedly lowered his blood pressure. Brandon would observe Martha working the dough or adding finishing touches to pastries. Sometimes she'd teach him small bits of baking basics, like how to tell if a loaf sounded hollow when tapped correctly, or how to cut the dough so the final product would have the perfect shape. But what intrigued him most was her unwavering calm. "Don't you ever get stressed that you might lose customers?" he asked one afternoon after most patrons had cleared out. The store was quiet, and the only sound was the whir of the ceiling fan. Or that your bread won't turn out right, or that some new trendy bakery might open next door. Martha shrugged good-naturedly. Sure, I could get stressed, but where would that lead me besides a state of worry? I try to focus on the baking, on my craft. If I do it well, my customers come back. If I make a mistake, I fix what I can, then move on. Life's too short to let fear become the boss of you. Brandon digested that, remembering too many nights when he had allowed fear of market shifts or impossible deadlines to keep him awake until the early hours of the morning. He'd strived for control back in the boardroom, measuring success in dollars and prestige. But in this small bakery, success was measured in smiles and customer satisfaction, an entirely different currency of human connection. As his week approached its end, Brandon realized he had rarely felt so at peace. Each day, he found time to stroll along the rocky beach near the inlet, watch the tide roll in, and breathe in the salty air. His phone calls were minimal, just enough to keep any fires at bay, but not so many that the fires consumed him. For the first time, he wondered if this was how life could be, rather than how it always was. Working with a sense of balance, practicing a type of empathy with coworkers and clients, the same way Martha handled her dough. He entered the bakery on a Thursday morning, stepping in just as a gust of wind carried the aroma of sugar and butter through the door. He found Martha placing a tray of cream puffs into the display case. "Morning," he greeted, feeling a surge of warmth simply being there. "Would you mind if I hung around a bit today? I can help out if needed." Martha looked at him, amusement playing on her lips. "Help out? You sure you're ready to get your hands dirty?" He set his phone aside. "Yes, I am. Teach me something new." She handed him an apron still warm from the dryer. The strings were a bit tangled, but she patiently guided his hands as he put it on. Then she led him behind the counter, where a massive metal bowl of dough sat ready for kneading. He washed his hands and readied himself, looking to Martha for direction. "You can start by gently folding the edges in," she instructed, showing him a technique that was more coaxing than forcing. "Feel the texture. See if it's sticky or smooth. That tells you if it needs more flour or more liquid." He did as told, pressing into the dough, feeling the elasticity of the gluten. It was surprisingly therapeutic. He marveled at how this messy combination of flour, water, and yeast was on its way to becoming a perfect bread loaf, if he nurtured it correctly. Martha stayed by his side, offering small pointers and encouraging nods. She seemed in no rush, and her presence imbued him with a sense of calm focus. "How come you don't have any flour or sticky dough on your clothes, but I'm already covered in it?" he asked, laughing at himself as he tried not to flick dough across the room. She chuckled. "Practice, my dear. You'll figure it out. Just like anything in life, once you do it enough, you become more efficient." When the dough had been thoroughly kneaded, Martha showed him how to roll it into a ball, place it in a greased bowl, and cover it with a damp cloth for rising. They moved on to shaping baguettes and scoring the tops so they would expand gracefully in the oven. Each cut needed to be at the right angle, Martha explained, a precise motion that was swift but not harsh, rather like how you often have to deliver critical feedback in a job. The metaphor wasn't lost on Brandon. Halfway through the morning, Brandon found himself thoroughly enjoying cleaning the counters. The backsplash was splattered with bits of dough, and flour dust coated almost every surface. Even sweeping felt oddly satisfying because he could see the instant results of tidying up after a busy rush. He had never experienced that in his corporate world, where projects stretched for months, success felt intangible, and any sense of forward momentum was undone by the next crisis. After the floor was swept, he sat down at one of the tables to catch his breath. Martha joined him with 2 glasses of water. She handed one to him and took a seat. "Thanks," he said, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead with a dish towel. "I didn't realize it would be this hands-on." Martha shrugged playfully. "That's the nature of the work. Your body might ache a bit, but it's a good ache, in my experience." He drank his water and regarded her. "How did you get into baking?" She settled back in her chair, a wistful look crossing her face. "Believe it or not, I used to be a nurse's aide, rode the bus to the hospital, worked long hours. One day, I got it in my head that life was too short to not do what you love. I put all my savings into this bakery. I had no formal training back then, just my mama's recipes and an obsession with perfecting my own style. The first few years were tough, but I poured my heart into it, made lots of mistakes, learned from them, and somewhere along the line, folks started to trust me with their bread." Brandon leaned forward, genuinely enthralled. There was a sincerity in her words that was absent in his own retelling of how he got into marketing. For him, it had been about climbing up the ladder, ensuring he had financial stability and chasing accolades. But fulfillment? That was a new concept he'd never fully considered. He swallowed, thinking about how he might want to pivot his career one day, or at least pivot his approach. That's inspiring, he murmured, fiddling with the apron strings. I've spent so long chasing after success, I guess, but I never asked myself if I was happy. I mean, really happy. Do I even like the day to day of what I do? Martha rested a flour dusted hand gently on his arm. It was a simple gesture, yet it conveyed a depth of empathy that felt startling. Well, sometimes you don't know if you like something until you've had a good taste of something else. It's never too late to change recipes, Brandon. That evening, as he lay in his bed in Breaked Frust's room, Brandon thought about what Martha had said. He had always kept an emotional distance from the idea of fulfillment. He'd considered it one of those intangible concepts reserved for motivational speeches. But recentering himself in the slow, methodical process of baking dough had unexpectedly stirred something within him, a desire to connect with the people he worked with, to be mindful of their strengths and struggles. The same care that went into kneading dough might transform how he led teams in the corporate world. He found himself scrolling through his phone's contact list. So many names he recognized as necessary connections in the business sense, but none who felt like real friends. Maybe that was part of the problem. He had built a network, not a community. He set the phone aside and stared up at the ceiling, hearing the muffled whoosh of ocean waves in the distance. He noticed how calm his body felt. Slowly, he drifted into the most restful sleep he'd had in ages. The next morning, he rose early. The sun was just peeking over the horizon as he found his way back to the bakery. Though Martha usually opened at 5:30, Brandon knocked on the door at 5, hoping she might need an extra pair of hands. After a moment, she opened it wide enough to peek out. "Well, look who we have here," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "You're in luck. I'm short-staffed today, and we've got a large order for a local wedding." He followed her inside, shrugging off his jacket and rolling up his sleeves. The next few hours passed in a flurry of precision sifting flour, measuring sugar, whisking eggs, rolling dough. Bridget, who was Martha's longtime assistant, arrived soon after and joined in the bustling activity. Brandon did everything from wiping down the counters to packaging pastries into decorative boxes, every step guided by Martha or Bridget's calm instructions. He found it strangely exhilarating. There was a clear purpose to each task, and at the end they placed trays upon trays of fresh rolls, croissants, and mini fruit tarts carefully into crates that a smiling couple came in to pick up. Brandon couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. He had helped craft something that would bring joy to a special event. As the newlyweds-to-be departed, the bride thanked Martha and Brandon profusely. "Your pastries are going to be the highlight of the reception," she exclaimed. Brandon blushed at her words, but he also felt an unanticipated thrill. His usual corporate praises, "You nailed the KPI targets," or "You boosted brand engagement," never moved him the way that bride's simple thanks did. Around midday, there was a lull in customers. Martha used the time to tidy up, and Brandon helped load some clean plates onto a shelf behind the counter. That's when his phone buzzed, a call from his direct manager. He hesitated, then answered. "Hopkins, where are you?" came his manager's curt voice. "I just got out of a meeting with the CEO. There's an urgent marketing push for next quarter. We need to strategize. We need your slide deck updates by tonight." Brandon felt tension coil in his chest. He muttered something about being out of town, but that he'd try to email the presentation soon. The manager's tone grew stern. "Make sure you do. This is a big deal." Hanging up, Brandon sighed and stared at his phone. His knee-jerk reaction was to hustle back to his lodging, whip open his laptop, and bury himself in slides. But something stopped him. The memory of the kneading dough, the wedding pastries, and how peaceful he felt just an hour ago, connecting with people in a tangible way. He realized he dreaded returning to the pace he had once prided himself on. Martha, sensing his disquiet, approached him gently. "Trouble at work?" He nodded. "They need me to finish some critical documents. It's just that..." He inhaled, trying to find words for the swirl of mixed feelings inside him. I'm anxious about getting sucked back in. I'm not sure I want that kind of frantic energy anymore. Martha placed a hand on his shoulder. Then maybe it's time for you to shape that energy differently, the way you shape dough. She offered him a small, understanding smile. You can still finish your work, but maybe with a new spirit, one that prioritizes connection and calm. Otherwise, you'll just be stressed again tomorrow and the day after. Brandon inhaled deeply, as though he was breathing in her advice. I suppose I can't ignore my duties, but maybe I can approach them differently. That evening, after the bakery closed, Brandon stayed behind to work on the slides from one of the tables. But instead of letting frustration build, he let himself break the task into manageable parts, pausing occasionally to sip tea or stretch by the window. Martha quietly cleaned up the counter space, reorganized equipment, but offered small words of encouragement whenever she passed him. When a page in the slide deck frustrated him, as they often did, he recalled how dough sometimes tears if you stretch it too roughly. Patience and gentleness, he thought, empathy, even for yourself. With that new mindset, he surprisingly whipped through the presentation in better time than he expected, and with far less anxiety. As he typed the final bullet point, he felt a swirl of satisfaction that he'd found a way to complete his work without letting it overwhelm him. Closing his laptop, he gave Martha a grateful smile. Thank you. She looked up from where she was stacking mixing bowls. For what, dear? He struggled for a moment before he spoke. For reminding me there's more to life than the boardroom. For teaching me that we can slow down and still be effective, maybe even be better. She nodded, eyes twinkling. I imagine there's a wave of people just like you trying to catch their breath. Maybe if you take this lesson back with you, you can show someone else how to breathe. He absorbed that. Through the window, he could see the orange glow of the setting sun. Technically, a day's work was never done in his office life, but he felt at peace to call it quits. The final morning of his stay, Brandon woke early again, packed his bags, and walked to the bakery one last time. Martha was setting out scones, blueberry, lemon poppy, and even a savory cheddar chive. She beckoned him inside, greeting him the way she had all week. So this is it, huh? She asked, gesturing to his suitcase. Time to head back home? He nodded. I wish I had more time, but I'll try to come back, maybe for a real vacation next time. He grinned sheepishly. One where I fully unplug, but I have to say, I've learned something here, more than I expected. Martha handed him a to-go bag with a warm cinnamon roll inside. To remember us by, she said, and to remind you that with patience and empathy, you can handle life's dough, no matter how sticky it might become. He smiled, distinctly touched by her gesture. I don't quite have the words, he admitted, but thank you. Martha patted his arm, flour leaving a faint mark on his jacket sleeve. Remember, empathy is like yeast. Let it rise in you, and it'll fill every corner of your life. With that, he gave her a gentle hug, something he'd never done with a near stranger before, but it felt right. Stepping onto the sidewalk, he looked back at the bakery's unassuming facade, the wooden sign swinging slightly in the breeze. The place had become a refuge, a crash course in what it meant to step beyond one's comfort zone and discover a more nurturing approach to the world. As he walked toward the taxi stand that would bring him to the airport, he opened the to-go bag and broke off a piece of the still-warm cinnamon roll. Its sweetness burst across his tongue, and he felt gratitude surge in his chest. Maybe, when he returned to the boardroom, he'd feel more connected to the people around him, more aware of their needs, and equally, more aware of his own need for genuine fulfillment. He might not transform overnight, but the seeds of change had been planted. He took one last look down the street, inhaled the salty sea air, and let the soft morning light warm his face. Inside him, something was settling, like a freshly kneaded loaf of bread, covered with a damp cloth, quietly rising into something new. Whether it was empathy, contentment, or a newfound friendship with life itself, he couldn't be certain. But he felt it, growing, steady and sure, just waiting to be shared with the world.